So, welcome back to Third Age Reforged and to another battle replay and to a map that we have seen in the past, albeit that might be a little bit difficult to see because of the rather heavy fog that has descended upon the area. This is a map referred to as GALADHOR, and it's quite a large map in the grand scheme of things, albeit we are going to be seeing it centred around the defence of this particular encampment, because this is a 5v3 defence. The defenders have got a few things that they can use to their advantage, some pretty decent terrain and choke points. Also the rivers themselves can also limit the manoeuvrability of the attackers somewhat. There are actually also some little outer defences which they could choose to try and dig into, but I wouldn't really recommend that unless the defenders want to front load their defence pretty heavily, which I don't think they're going to do based on the way that they've set up initially, and perhaps they shouldn't. In a 4v4 maybe you could get away with such things, but not in a 5v3. You don't have the numbers to blanket the map effectively enough. This battle was sent to me by Y2K86. There isn't really any sort of theme to go with this one, but just based on the fact that it's a map that we haven't seen in a good long time, is enough really to push it to the front of the queue in terms of Reforged battle replays that I have at any rate. So let's go through the attacking armies first and foremost, starting off with Jesus, that's going to be a difficult one. I'm just going to call him Kolad, the middle section of that name, because my brain is having a complete blank on that one, unfortunately. So you have defeated me on this occasion. Playing as Numenor, he has got some Balagire archers on the front line, along with some Numenorian steel bows. Now, Numenorian steel bows, of course, don't have that much in the way of ammunition, but the armour-piercing arrows could prove to be really, really useful, especially late on, if the defenders are scraping the barrel, but they still have a few elite units to really shore up their defences. Something like the steel bows can be exactly the sort of thing to turn the battle into a rather unwinnable proposition for them. Now in Erebor Guard, rather the opposite actually, it's probably better to commit them earlier in the battle because they are one of the better defensive archers in the game in terms of skirmishing with the enemy. Obviously a very heavy archer, fantastic armour values and a bit of a shield value as well, which is not universal for heavy archers. Balagire footmen are very basic as far as average human spearmen go, but they're also not as expensive as many of the other Numenorian infantry units, and they do offer you a decently mobile anti-cavalry force to cover your flanks, and also they can be used as a bit more of a, again, a melee meat shield as such on the front line with Numenor. But for the most part, Numenor are all about their upper tier of infantry units, and central to that effort is going to be the Numenorian cohort over here, which are a really good unit of massive line infantry. They're capable of dishing out a pretty impressive amount of damage, in spite of the fact they are a shielded unit, so they are always going to be defensive to some extent. They do focus a little bit more so on their damage dealing capabilities than other similar units do at this class. Got some more Balagire footmen over on the other side. Got a couple of units of Seafarers of Nindamos here, which, whether you're on the attack or the defence in a siege situation like this, even though they don't have much ammunition once again, having javelins on your side is always going to be good for potentially blowing a hole in a defensive line or slowing down the attackers as they advance. We shall see if the defenders are able to do that. But the Seafarers also offer a decent medium infantry unit once they're out of ammunition, so there's no reason not to bring them in most situations for Numenor, to be honest with you, given what they're good at. Royal Legion of Armenelos are here alongside the Pharazim Swordmaster, so both Numenorian bodyguard units are present today. The shielded version and the heavy swordsman Pharazim Swordmasters in particular are pretty outstanding because of their third hit point they have, pretty much, well, yeah, definitely unique in terms of heavy swordsmen. Royal Legion are also pretty good as well though because of their added numbers when it comes to their peers, but yeah, going for a quality-centric, more infantry-focused build is, well, I say that, this is actually more archer-focused than I would normally expect Numenor to be, but they do suffer from that a little bit because they've also gone for their bodyguard unit, so it's a pretty small army in terms of their sort of outright martial might in melee, which is a little bit odd to say for Numenor, but we shall see if their allies have brought enough numbers to compensate. Y2K himself is playing as the Hobbit, so I mean numbers shouldn't be too much of an issue given their army is what it is. Plenty of armour piercing as well, battling Brandybucks and Farmers of Buckland, so both shock infantry units here in high numbers. The battling Brandybucks are cheaper, but the Farmers of Buckland do have that very nasty charge bonus and are very, very damaging as well with those scythes. I think this is 2 units of Beornings. No, actually 22. Yeah, that's just a single unit of Beornings. But still, we'll give you a nice, fast-moving unit, which, considering there are open areas on this field, some very open areas over on this side of the map, if the attackers, or defenders I should say, do elect to loiter for too long, the Beornings can punish that, or they can be saved for later on, for trying to get some hammer and anvil charges when some gaps start to appear. Dunedain Rangers, whether on the attack or the defence, much like Javelins, only to an even more extreme extent. You'd be mad not to bring Rangers if you could, to be honest with you, given the ceiling that they have in terms of kill count. So can the attackers get into a good position to rip the defenders' lines asunder? We shall see. Longbottom Mob, so some throwing projectiles there, very basic, but they will do the job nonetheless. Bandibrass Archers here to do some range damage as well, more of a basic archer this than the Dunedain Rangers, of course. Hobbitry and Arms forming up a pretty substantial front line. A couple of units of bandits, we have some Ents as well, and a unit of Proudfoot Protectors to round things off. So obviously the pikes combined with crossbows. Honestly, my favourite Hobbit unit in terms of their effectiveness. The Ents are all well and good, the Bjornings are all well and good, but they are kind of specialty units in their varying classes. Bandits, of course, with their javelins, and then the slight armour piercing on the Hobbitry and Arms also gives them a solid purpose. Then we have the Womb Raider, who's playing as Dorwinion, the Morroquendi Gladelords, who performed pretty well in that cavalry tourney that was showcased recently. They weren't the best, and indeed no Elven cavalry was in that situation, but the Morroquendi Gladelords were the best among the elves, as it turned out, at least with regards to that little knockout tournament. The Gladelords will perform a very similar role, really, to the Bjornings, only they are more typical of what you'd expect from cavalry. And when they get their lances down, obviously truly devastating off the charge. Elven melee defense values, while not quite as overpowering as I thought it may have been, given my own preconceptions on horseback, it's still a very, very useful thing to bring to bear. Catapult, I'm actually surprised we haven't seen some artillery already from the attackers, but they have got some here. So if the defenders dig in an exposed position, the catapult can punish them royally for that. We also have some Elvelyn infantry and Vineguard forming up the main body of the Dorwinion infantry, so defensive spears and defensive swordsmen. The spears, of course, are a little bit more defensively savvy, but the Elvelyn swordsmen are going to be a little bit more capable of dishing out a little bit of damage of their own. Elvelyn marksmen will make for a really good unit to trade back and forth with arrow fire against their foe, and that's pretty much it, at least with regards to what we can see. There are lumbermen, and of course many of the elven units in the Dorwinion roster can also end up hiding, but looks like a more rank and file build, which I actually approve of in this case, because it helps offset the kind of build that Numenor have brought. Then we have Pedexa, the first example of this certainly not being a lore-friendly battle, because Mordor are marching alongside pretty much universally good aligned factions here. So we've got some Orc fodder ready to push across the river. Post-haste, we've got some Moran on Guard. I'm always surprised when I see the Moran on Guard, because I never really think they're worth bringing. They rarely actually perform all that much better than Orc fodder in melee. I mean, they are better as a unit, but based on the situations they're in, they very rarely do all that much damage. And yeah, I think Moran on infantry tend to be the better pick. I mean, you rarely see the Moran on Guard for those reasons, I think, but Pedexa has brought a unit of them here, so that'll be interesting. Temple Executioners, Nazgul, Uruk Captains, Oleg High, Temple Guard as well, so yeah, pretty much the full run out here of the higher end Mordor units. No one, it seems, who plays Mordor can resist doing this kind of thing. We've got some Moran on Archers back here as well, some Orc Javelins for the ranged presence alongside the, of course, armor-piercing Temple Guard. Moran on Infantry are here in a fair few numbers. Blackguard of Barad-dûr, Great Shield Infantry when they're on the attacking army can be such a nuisance to deal with. If you're ready for them, they can actually prove to be really not all that dangerous, but if you're not, they can prove to be the difference between victory and defeat for the defenders. And then a couple of units of Minas Morgul chosen as well to help tidy things up in terms of having a unit which is a little bit more resilient than most of the other basic units we've seen so far. And last but by no means least, we have DF Mark, who's playing as Lothlorien, so some Blades of the Wood and some Spears of the Wood basic Lorien units. Again, the elves have to make some kind of sacrifice when they're on the attack, because they can't bring an all-elite army, otherwise they'd be such a tiny force that they'd be focused down, and rightly so. These units, though, they do still have a bit of a problem in the sense that they aren't all that resilient to ranged fire, but we shall see how well they can perform. I've got some Galadhor Blade Masters that are hidden, some standard heavy Loren-armed units in the Spears and Axemen, so line infantry and basic, well, I say basic, but line infantry and heavy spears, which will form up the main body of the Lorien front line. March Wands of the Wood, poison arrows could be useful depending on who exactly is on the defence, more Spears of the Wood. So a little bit more restraint by Lothlorien has been shown here in terms of just vomiting out their elite units onto the field than most players would show, I think, so credit to DF Mark for that. Of course, he has still got the Watchers of the Golden Wood, and also some Woodman Protectors over here as well as Loren-armed Archers. Still a more ranged focused army than many other factions would go for, but I think that's understandable from a Lorien perspective, given that that is their whole thing. Now, Moving across the river, it's a rather imposing defensive position that Lothlorien have to deal with right from the off here, and the army that they will have to face down immediately is their fellow elves, Mirkwood, played by Fire Captain Les McBurney. So Woodland Protectors we've already seen, of course, exactly the same unit that Lothlorien have, only they're going to be fighting for Mirkwood. Hiri Peng, based on the terrain advantages and the quality advantages that the individual 3 armies should have over the 5, Mirkwood should be comfortably able to keep Lothlorien at bay from long range, so it's going to be incumbent, I think, on Mordor to take the initial brunt of the assault. We shall see. Hiri Peng again, Hiri Auth are going to be defending from the front as well, a good unit of line infantry. They don't have the armour upgrade, but they don't necessarily need it. They'll be fine against Mordor, and I don't think the armour upgrade would allow them to defeat something like the Loreland Axeman 1-1 in melee. I might be wrong. We've got some Ents over here, Hiri Peng. We've got some Elven King's Palace Guard, a very, very scary unit of shock infantry, combined, of course, with the anti-cavalry capabilities they have. Hiri Auth, Elders of the Elven King. Very recently we've seen Mirkwood be fairly effective after all, with units such as this. Sindar of the Girdle are also over here as well, so I don't know how well they're going to be utilised. Like we said, there's fast movers on the other team, plenty of anti-cavalry options. So Sindar of the Girdle need to be careful, because as we've seen somewhat recently as well, they are a little bit more fragile than you may expect, so timing is going to be everything, and obviously competency with their use as well for Mirkwood. Now then, moving over here to the centre of the 2 defenders, Mirkwood and Erebor, putting aside their differences here, as the aptly named Hairy 1233 is going to be playing as Erebor. Ironfoot crossbows, again, fantastic defensive tool. If they can target down the right things, their stopping power can make them a horrid unit to face off against. Got some Ironfoot warriors over here as well, basic, but they will certainly do the job. Dragon Slayers, armour piercing, Highborns are not, but they're still the most defensively, the best defensive all-rounders, I'll say, of Erebor's unit. The Obsidian Guard take that crown in melee, but the shields do serve a significant purpose when it comes to mitigating that range damage. Ironfoot Spears, Axe Guard of Erebor, Erebor Legionaries, the Blacklocks. I mean, body piercing from rangers is all well and good, but when you combine it with the armour piercing and stopping power of crossbows, it can be devastating, but they do need the right angle of attack, it's worth saying. They're not as easy to use as rangers in terms of positioning, but in a settlement like this, I feel as though you have all of the options you need. We've got pikes, we've got spears, we've got some defensive artillery, not too surprising to see the dwarves bring that. Some more Erebor legionaries here, some Ironfoot warriors, so again, a more balanced and holistic approach, I think, from Hairy 1233 than we've seen, we're likely to see from many other players, but we'll see if it proves to be good enough, this army, to withstand the superior numbers of their foes. And last, but by no means least, once again, we have Imladris, played by Rastlin. Obviously Imladris, ever the fan favourites. We've got some Riders of the Dorwinion and the Gwaithie Rockdor. We'll see if they can redeem themselves. They're somewhat disappointing showing in that cavalry tourney, where they were knocked out in the quarterfinals by the eventual winners. Not to spoil too much there, but there it is. Eldarenway Spearmen, going to be a very good unit on the front line. Plenty of Swords of Rivendell, so again, going for not just their elites, but some rank and file as well to bolster their numbers. And the Swords of Rivendell 1-1 are still a pretty difficult unit to wear down, especially with that armour upgrade to mitigate the weakness that they do have ultimately. They're one of the few Imladris units to not have huge armour values right from the off. Imladris Guardians and Sentries making up a very effective front line. Gwaithie Arthand, Dorwinion River Wards and Swordmasters for the heavy swordsman aspect of the Imladris army. Noratuno Warriors and Archers of Rivendell, Eldarenway Archers, God Halim are here as well, so the full gamut of Imladris Archers. And finally we have the Gwaithie Mirdain. That armour piercing is going to be useful against a lot of the attackers today. Not so much the Hobbits, not so much Lothlorien either, but certainly the Orcs and the 2 factions that are more dependent on human infantry. Gwaithie Mirdain, exactly the sort of thing which are going to be very useful against them. So I will make a little bit of a cut, because it's probably going to be a little bit of a transit for the blue team here before they can start laying siege to the encampment that lies through the fog, unless of course the defending cavalry in the Sindar and the Noldor decide to take the fight to the blue team earlier, in which case it won't be as big a cut as I was expecting. But either way, we will be rejoining when the battle is getting underway. So we shall rejoin now, I think, because it's only a matter of time before the assault does get underway, as Mirkwood's position is set and Mordor are just down the way over here, just with a small expeditionary force for the time being. A few units of Orc fodder and some Moran on guard. And then of course we'll also have Lothlorien, who will probably have to take a slower approach given the fact that they won't be able to sustain the same level of casualties that their Mordor allies on this occasion can. Dorwinion are also over here, and they do have free passage across this river. It's very, very difficult to prepare for the defenders to hold on to this position over here, and if they do, then they expose themselves in other ways. Meanwhile, it is actually over here that we're going to see the first volleys take place, although I think that's just because they were on fire at will from Rasslin, the Norrentino warriors, thinking to try and shoot the Dorwinion forces. And we're not going to be seeing the outer area over here, this little sort of external fortress with the village nearby held by the defenders, which again is very understandable. Like I said, in a 4v4 you can kind of get away with it, in a 5v3 much less so. Very risky proposition to try and claim that ground. You simply do not have the numbers to spread yourself that thin, especially when two of the defending armies are elven. Simply will not have the manpower. You can see the dust being kicked up just in the distance through the fog by the Lothlorien army as they start to manoeuvre their way forwards once again. There is a little bit of movement over here. I mean, Imladris moving over here is somewhat interesting, given the fact that you would expect them to be at least giving some of their strength over to help the dwarves in holding this side against Numenor. Although I suppose this Greenwood Rangers, I mean, they are mixing and matching their defensive positions quite a lot here, other defenders, which is pretty good. It means that one player is not solely responsible for one position, and you get to take advantage of the varying strengths of all of the factions in every defensive position that you take up. The dwarves being the ones to pick up the slack. Riders of the Dorwinion are firing, again I think more because they're on fire at will as the Wound Raider moves forward. The Elvelyn marksmen are there. Again, no, Elvelyn marksmen, most of these arrows being buried into the cliffside. This is exactly the kind of activity that the Elvelyn marksmen are going to be good at. Then again, Elven arrows do have higher base damage, so they will puncture through heavy plate a little bit better than standard arrows will. Meanwhile, I'm seeing movement over here, sort of. Elders of the Elven King, I think they're going after... Yes, they are. They're going after the Nazgul over here. Trying to whittle them down, and they will succeed. I mean, the Nazgul, it'll take them a little while to actually get away from this location, because, of course, those Silverthorn arrows do knock them over. Even if they don't score any kills, the Nazgul will still be significantly weakened as a result of this experience. Dorwinion moving over, and they will be also sending units up this hill alongside Mordor, as Lothlorien start making their way forwards as well. Orc fodder, spears of the wood, the poison arrows of the March Wardens starting to hit the front lines again. This isn't going to do grievous damage to the Hiri Elf, because while their armour isn't the best, they do have a good shield value from the front, and the March Wardens are basic as far as Elven archers go. Those poison projectiles will also not cause them to rout. Hopefully my voice holds together as always. Eldarinway Spearmen on the way over, but for the time being I would imagine certainly Lothlorien are going to engage in more skirmish style tactics rather than being super aggressive. Mordor and Dorwinion at any moment though could lurch forward and start putting real pressure on your front line, so there is that to consider. Norrentino warriors going blow for blow with the Elvelyn marksmen, and with the assistance of the Riders of the Dorwinion, as much as they are wasting a lot of their ammo, some of those shots will be going through, and there are 2 units of Norrentino warriors here after all. This is a lot of defensive ammunition though. This isn't so much the case of the defenders are in danger of losing this skirmish fight because of the overwhelming force they're delivering, but 1 unit of Elvelyn marksmen is not all that important. 3 units of Elven archers, mounted and dismounted, is going to be important for the defenders later on if they hope to weather the storm that's to come. So this is really more of a case of wasted ammunition than anything else, I would suggest. Elvelyn Vanguard in behind, so Dorwinion going to be able to support both pushes. Meanwhile, we're starting to see a little bit more action over here as well. The Dwarven ranged corps is going to be something to watch out for as the Hobbitry in arms crosses the river first. Not too surprising to see the dwarves hold fire, as it's just these basic hobbits that are going to be pressurising the front line to start. I mean, most of the hobbits are armour piercing, but even so, the quality of the dwarven infantry should still be far too much if they advance without any Numenorian support as we go over one of the central encampments here. This is a fight which is going to be live and die, really, I think, on the first layer of defence. This is interesting, though. I was actually somewhat wrong in the fact that Lothlorien are being the most aggressive here. Morroquendi Gladelords charging into the Ents. And now getting out of the way as the Javelins start to do their work as well. Javelins doing good damage to the Elder Runway Spearmen. Getting a volley into the Ents as well to weaken them for later. I mean, to be fair, it is still mostly a case of ranged units hammering away at the defending front line, but the defender's not really doing a great deal here, and you can't really afford to just sort of stand here and take this kind of beating from javelins like this. Elsewise, you could find yourself in some pretty sticky spot later on. Morroquendi Gladelords do charge in, but they don't really connect with the Ents. They don't really do all that much damage to the Wooden Realm Axemen either, so the idea was right, but positionally I think that was what ruined things for those Gladelords there. Wasn't really a case of even the execution being utterly terrible. Charging in again. I mean, they may as well just charge into the Wooden Realm Axemen, to be honest. They don't. This is a little bit more player error, I would suggest. You're never going to be able to just amble your way through Wooden Realm Axemen like that. And now they're also getting into the Elder Runway Spearmen. So not the best, this, from the Gladelords. And it looks like they are also shaken. I don't think they will rout. No, they're stabilised, but going to have to rethink how they're utilising those, I think. Catapults in position. There's not really obvious targets. You could try and go after the pikes, but they're in a rather thin formation, so you can end up missing quite a lot of those shots. Better off waiting for things to blob up a little bit more. Meanwhile, continuing back and forth between the Noratuno Warriors and what very little remains of the Elvelyn Marksmen, so fairly dominant performance from Imladris at range, but with a lot of ammunition expended. And with Numenor yet to come, that is... it's going to be interesting to see how that works out. Numenor, of course, themselves are pretty good in the skirmish fight. Well, Longbottom Mob forcing a reaction here from the Ironfoot crossbows. Again, a very similar situation as with the Elvelyn Marksmen. It's very obvious who's going to win this skirmish fight, of course, but ammunition being utilised on a unit that they would really rather not be using it on. Especially when it comes to crossbows as well, because Ironfoot crossbows could be so useful for dealing with some of the scarier elements of, in particular, Numenor's army. That's what I'd be looking at there. But so far, the attackers seem content to just pester the defenders into utilising their resources, and then more significant movement will happen later on, I suspect. As the Numenorian army also starts making its moves. There are several areas you can make a final stand on this map as well. You could either go here, towards the front end of the encampment, or you can retreat further back. The artillery is going after, but like I said, attempting a target as the Imladris sentries are, and you'll get some Elder Runway Spearmen in for the offer there as well if you can hit. They are in a thin formation, and it's very likely that you'll miss, catapults being what they are, especially with Flaming Shot active. Spears of the Wood are here. Again, shots going short, and there were javelins there. What unit was that? Was that Orc javelins? Yes, it was. Not quite as deadly as the Woodland Protectors, but the same situation applies here, to the point where the defenders are really hoping that they can hold their position and let the attackers break upon them, but the attackers are preparing the ground here quite well for the inevitable assault. You can see here the Elder Runway Spearmen solid enough to withstand a beating from javelins, which even basic javelins, of course, have got armor-piercing damage, but Elder Runway Spears withstanding it so far. Over here, the defenders haven't utilised a huge amount of their own resources, though, but again, Keldon River Patrol, another basic unit of javelins. This is more free damage, essentially, that the attackers can make work for themselves. This is a little bit more worrying, though. You can see there that the Greenwood Rangers, enough is enough, and just one volley is enough to absolutely devastate that unit of lightly armoured Keldon River Patrol. So they will immediately run away. They will take another volley as well, and as they were retreating at the time, they'll also kill off a decent number of Orc Javelins as well. The power of Rangers when they can rip through multiple units at once. Meanwhile, still the Marchwardens of the Wood firing away. Elder Runway Spearmen a little bit more devastated than they were previously. Well. Those Rangers still have plenty of ammunition as well, so that's a good amount of kills they've got right away. Meanwhile, Numenor now also starting to try and whittle down the enemy front lines, and they're going after, I think, uncovered Ironfoot pikes, which is not great. I mean, again, among regular rank and file pikes, the dwarven ones do have good armour, but still, it's not the sort of unit you want to be taking sustained arrow fire like this. You're going to end up hemorrhaging your manpower over time, and that is most certainly not what you want. Catapult moving for the defenders. Are we seeing melee engagements? Not for the moment. We're seeing yet more range pressure being put on to the defenders here as the bandits do their thing. Once again, they're going after the crossbows to force a response from them, and again they're going to be successful. This also has the effect of lowering the DPS of the crossbows for everyone they kill, but it's more the ammunition that they want to get rid of, I would suggest. And still, so far, so good from that point of view. Lothlorien warriors in place. Elvelen marksmen pushing forward a second unit of them. Dorwinion will be sending forward support for Numenor once the attack begins properly. As we go over a smithy and the stables, we have got Greenwood Watchers moving forward. So a taste of their own medicine at long last here for the attackers, as the Greenwood Watchers from Les McBurney's Mirkwood army move forward, utilising their thrown projectiles, assassin class units of course, and they have bloodied some of the Olag High. They've killed off some of the basic orcs, just to let the attackers know that they won't have things all their own way when it comes to this sort of thing. But they have convinced the Olag High to charge forward, and I think the Elder Enway Spearmen will need a bit of support actually. As strong a unit as they are, the Spear Malus means they won't be able to do that much damage to trolls, and they're also still in a loose formation as well, so they're not really going to be able to put on that solid shield wall front line that you want. I mean, Orc fodder of course will die in droves to Elder Enway, but that's by the by. More arrows being traded back and forth. I mean, this is the problem though, the Greenwood Watchers are pretty fragile. There's plenty of units ready. I mean, still over here, a little bit of a counter-attack from the Elder Enway Spearmen, trying to go after some more of these javelins and marchworns of the wood. There's also some Imladris cavalry here, which could yet be a real problem. I mean, they're being used purely defensively, I think, to stop the Morroquendi Glade Lords, but honestly, the Imladris cavalry could be aggressive here, and so much of the Lothlorien army is so far away that you could actually completely mop up this attack, I think, from Lothlorien, if you were aggressive with that cav. The Gwaithri Rockdoor could recharge them, they could charge into that unit of Marchworns of the Wood. You see routing. I think that would be the way to go, and it would certainly make up for the losses that you've sustained so far, as well as significantly lowering the effectiveness of Lothlorien being one of the scarier forces on the field for the attackers today. I think that would be a good idea, and it would also highlight the problem with having your reinforcements so far away. Meanwhile, what have we here? Orc fodder and Moran on guard now joining in on the front line. I mean, there is a big old gap in the defences at this point, but condensed as they are, I mean, the Olag High might make the difference here with all of these basic orcs alongside them. I think that will be enough to cause significant problems for the Elder Enway Spearmen, given they've already taken a lot of damage. So now, before I was able to finish my sentence, the ball is back in the defender's court to try and make something happen there. Still got more units in reserve over here. Naran Iroh Guard, a full infantry assault, however, now. I say full, but an infantry assault from Numenor. Victory seems certain for them. The Ironfoot Pikes on their own, and their formation is being buckled, which is what's causing the problems here. Ironfoot Pikes are here. Swords of Rivendell charging into support, though, and that should be enough to make a difference. Swords of Rivendell should be fairly dominant in a straight-up melee fight against a unit like Balagai Footmen, armour upgrade or no. And also some Ironfoot Warriors moving in as well. Lothlorien warriors out of ammunition presumably, so fulfilling their secondary function as a melee combatant. But Numenor can commit more infantry units forward, and I'm sure they will. Numenorian cohort already on the way, plenty of support coming in from those archers. And interestingly enough, the dwarves also down here trying to counter-attack into a lot of these ranged units, but unfortunately for them, a single unit of Ironfoot warriors is going to get mobbed by roving bands of hobbits and bandits. You are seeing, I think that is Blackwatch Engineer, Blacklock Engineer fire, isn't it? Yes, it is. I'm not entirely certain that's worthwhile. I mean, they've routed the bandits, but is that all that important? I question it, most assuredly. Infantry in arms, battling brandybucks are back there. I mean, as soon as more of these armor-piercing units come forward. Could be a little bit dicey for them. And again, gaps in the Dwarven front line means that these crossbows are not going to be able to continue their barrage because they're going to be engaged in melee. You know, a lot of these hobbits individually are very feeble at keeping themselves alive, but as a collective they can be a real conundrum to solve. They're also going to have to be reliant on their quality once more. More reinforcements are going to be needed. Ironfoot halberds will help shore things up. Forward come the attacking Ents, and again, these front lines are maybe thin enough to the point where that could be exactly the sort of thing that's called for. Armor piercing from the halberds will be helpful, but it will take something like these guys, the Axe Guard of Erebor, to truly make an impression in that regard, I believe. As the Ents continue to surge forwards. Ooh, bit of a crunchy frame rate there. Numenorian cohort now in behind the line, so they're going to be exposing themselves to maybe some sort of range fire, although it doesn't look like there's all that much forthcoming. A few whistles of crossbow bolts. They're going after the other unit of Numenorian cohort. Yeah, this front line is in real danger of falling apart, so the attackers really doing exactly what they wanted to here, softening up the line and then calmly and professionally disposing of the battered remnants that they left. Over here, meanwhile, things are a little bit more muted, perhaps as a result of the little counter-attacks that have been mounted by the defenders. They have slowed the attacking progress over here. Spears of the Wood being taken care of by a unit of Hirialth. Again, more projectiles being used by Lothlorien, unit of Orc Fodder here, just to make sure they've got the numbers to continue this. Still, all of those units are waiting across the river. There's no danger of putting them a little bit closer and them getting targeted. Only 3 Ents remain for the defenders. There's still plenty of reinforcements they can commit here, but they're pulling their punches a little bit, the defenders. If they commit too early, they know that they will fizzle out more quickly. Moran on guard moving forward, Woodland Protectors helping to block the way. Greenwood Rangers being used again, maybe a little bit premature on using a unit like this. The angle is not entirely in their favour, because they're shooting down into units, so the angle is such that they won't be ripping through as many units as maybe they would like, but even still. Or like High marching uphill. Watch is going to get back into position, so I've already seen them used pretty well, and they will now be able to use more of their throwing projectiles. The Olag High have been charging in and out, so they haven't been dying as quickly as we would expect trolls to. But they still do have a shelf life, most assuredly. Too many of those projectiles going into Moran on guard. That is kind of the problem with assassins. I've noticed that very often, I mean, they're actually pretty good for dealing with trolls, as you just saw, but very often many of the individual combatants in the unit will target down single units within, or single soldiers within enemy units, which is a little bit bizarre, but it also means that you basically have tons of potential damage being poured into like 4 or 5 dudes, which means they will almost certainly die, but you're not blanketing that damage across the unit as you would like. These Olag High now starting to fall by the wayside a little bit more. Assassins, of course, do have their abilities in melee as well that can be used to good effect here. Now then, Dorwinion moving forward a little bit more so. I mean, Dorwinion, to be fair, their support will have to come in the shape of just backing up Numenor in the way that they're doing here with this unit of Elvelid infantry rather than flanking or anything, because there's no way they can flank through the fortifications. Numenorian cohort routing in the face of the Riders of the Dorwinion, but there's still plenty of units over here. Defeat seems sort of rimmed out. I mean, looking at this, a lot of this front line is now made up of Balaguer archers, so maybe starting to feel the strain a little bit here, the attackers. Worth keeping an eye on. Back here, actually almost a certainty. And back over yonder, there's a lot of dead individuals over here. Once again, it looks as though it's Paul Woundraider with his Kelvin River Patrol, which took the brunt of whatever that was, presumably the Blacklock engineers. I mean, there's chaos reigning over here, as you would expect, wherever the hobbits are involved. Morroquendi Glade Lords are over here, what remains of them anyway. The Blacklock engineers are being feasted upon now by Bjornings and Ents, which is, of course, not great. Presumably they still have ammunition. I mean, even if they killed that unit of Keldon River Patrol, you expect much more from a unit as potentially devastating as the Black Locks. Erebor Legionaries scattered as well. Things, again, looking a little bit all over the place for the Dwarves. There are Ironfoot Spears on the way, but is that going to be enough to salvage the situation over here? I somewhat doubt it. Some of the Bjorning are still caught on the front line. You'd imagine that would probably be the end of them, given the anti-cavalry nature of most of the Dwarves that are fighting here. More of the Hobbits. I mean, there's Dunedain Rangers on the way forward as well. A lot of the more basic Hobbits struggling a little bit in the face of the quality of the Dwarven units, but Y2K still has more reinforcements that you can command. the rapid advance of Numenor and Dorwinion here. Archers of Rivendell are there. Again, I think the dwarves have been the ones to take the biggest beating in this fight so far, because once again they're a little bit isolated over here. They should be fine holding on for now, but it's one of those situations where Seafarers of Niendamos, Obsidian Guard are here. There's Ironfoot Spears, there's a unit of Dragon Slayers as well, but the Hobbits are on their way. So they're going to need to mount a sort of double-sided defence if they intend to continue to stay here, or they just need to retreat. I think retreating is probably their best bet, because you can't afford to throw Obsidian Guard and Dragon Slayers under the bus for later, given how effective they can be. These units will get a few more kills yet. A little bit of range support as well, which of course is going to carve its way through a unit as defensively feeble as Lumberman. There's the Imladris General though. Bit of an assassination going on there, you'd have to say, by the Morroquendi Glade Lords, who have taken damage throughout this fight, but they've certainly proven themselves to be... I mean, can they get another one? He is there, he's exposed, so that would be a remarkable 1-2 from the Morroquendi Glade Lords if they were able to do that, but I don't know if you can... I don't know if they're going to be able to target down the individual model within the unit, although they could get him here. No. And also, I mean, Elders of the Elven King, when they swing in melee, they're going to be pretty devastating. The God Halim are up here. It does look as though this Mordor assault is completely falling apart. Most of the heavy lifting now being done by Dorwinion, a single unit of Alvalan infantry, really all that remains. Palace Guard, this is probably the Nazgul, right? Yes it is. And he falls as well, hits the ground like a sack of spuds. Not sure about some of these targets that the defenders are focusing down with their missiles. This may yet prove to be a costly error, but time will only tell on that front. Eerie Pen continuing to fire, Sindar of the Girdle making it so that the advance is always going to be a little bit treacherous. Temple Guard are moving forwards, Alvalan Infantry, Sindar of the Girdle need to charge in and out if they are to be effective here. I don't know if the Temple of Guard still have ammunition, possibly not given the fact they've drawn their swords. Alvalan Infantry are of course being handily defeated by the Broynin River Wards. Lothlorien reinforcements are on their way forward now, including Watchers of the Golden Wood, so all is not lost. Armor-piercing arrows are being used on Greenwood Rangers. I mean, the armor-piercing isn't really the point. The fact that the high base damage means that each hit is very likely to be a kill. Defenders giving the attackers some of their own medicine. Earlier on, the Woodland Protectors were a real pain for Mirkwood. Now, the same is true for Lothlorien, as their Galadhor and Blade Masters take some point-blank volleys. Over on the other side, more damage being done to this unit of Alvalan infantry, which has held on for a long time actually, to give Dorwinion's infantry its credit. We've seen this before. Dorwinion have got a very dependable rank and file system of units, but part of the issue they have for themselves is they're not exactly exceptional when it comes to damage dealing either, so that is something to bear in mind. I think, yeah, a retreat is going to have to be ordered here. Alvalan Vanguard pushing forwards. They're going to have to leave behind, I think, the White Arthan, so maybe a little premature in committing such an important unit, and they end up breaking as a result as well, which is a real tragedy. But again, this kind of foresight in a battle is needed. Forward come the Pharazim Swordmasters as well. We're seeing Dorwinion advance through here, Proudfoot Protectors still moving. So yeah, the Hobbits claiming all of this part of the encampment over here. And I think based on the fact that that fight is still happening over here, I think this central position is probably the best last stand. I mean, I suppose you could retreat back over here, but you would need to prize yourself off the Mordor and Lothlorien attacks, which while they're faltering, they are still there. You can't just turn your back on them and expect to receive no damage in return. Around on archers receiving the attentions of the Gwaithir Rockdor, who will now be charging off into the distance. Elders of the Elven King starting to fire away as well. Temple Guard going to make it very difficult to return fire on them with those Silverthorn arrows. Vanguard Lornan spears are routing, so the heavy Lothlorien units were committed forwards, at least to some capacity, and very quickly being sent back from whence they came. Lothlorien are moving forward now though, so yeah, this is a general retreat. And they did it at just the right time, I think, when Mordor's assault was flagging, when Lothlorien had to sort of refresh their front line. And they also have some very depleted but still present cavalry to cover this retreat back to what will be the final stand, I'm sure. I think last time we saw GALADHOR, it was this which was used as the final stand as well, so good to see the other part of the map is being used for variety's sake on this occasion. Got some Erebor legionaries who are being, again, used as a rear guard. They'll do very nicely against Elven Vanguard, of course, but they are also going to be also the Dwarven Catapult, which was actually very effective on the other side of the battlefield. Farmers of Buckland just ambling into melee, so not able to get off their pretty nasty charge bonus, but that armor piercing is still the sort of thing which is very necessary for mopping up these Dwarven warriors. These dwarves do need to hotfoot it a little bit, otherwise they are in danger of being left behind, as it were. These Ironfoot spears just covering the retreat still, and now they too shall leave shortly before the Longbottom mob is going to be able to do any little bits of damage that they may be able to. Meanwhile, Watchers of the Golden Wood going after the Gwaithir Rockdor, who are making a real nuisance of themselves in this attack, as well as the Sindar of the Girdle. So we've seen defensive cavalry used to pretty good effect here, and I think both sides have actually done a pretty reasonable job in this fight in bits and pieces. That being the case with all things even, in a 5v3 there is a certain natural advantage that goes to the attackers, so we'll see if that holds true. And Watch the Golden Wood should be able to do decent damage as well. Gwaithir Rockdor reclaiming some of their lost honour perhaps from their recent failings in the knockout tourney. A nice skewering charge there from the Temple Guard. Another rider falls. 2 riders fall. Sindar the Girdle making a nuisance of themselves as well. And it's important to kill off these Watchers of the Golden Wood as well, because they're such a dangerous unit to try and face in melee late on. So it makes a lot of sense really why the defenders would want them gone. What's going on over here? Erebor Legionaries being completely overwhelmed? Yes indeed they are. Pharazim Swordmasters pushing their way to the front as well, so quantity and quality working against them. Numenor doing their thing. Lumbermen are in and amongst as well. Shambling forwards. What's going on over here? Nothing is what? No attacks are likely to come from this direction. The attackers would have to double back. I mean, this is clearly an example of fire at will, which is a bit unfortunate. What are they actually firing at? Yeah, especially when you consider they're going up against Banderbrass archers which are stuck on a rock. This is the sort of thing which, I mean, when you look at it, in spite of the fact the defenders have been inflicting damage, there's still a very substantial army knocking on their door, which is why I still think the attackers will probably be okay in this fight. Defeat seems certain. Banner carriers left alive, but not for much longer, I would assume. Is the cavalry still active? No, although there is a unit of Swords of Rivendell over here. The Dwarven Catapult crew running for the hills. We had echo on those battle sounds there. So, I mean, Watch the Golden Wood using their ammunition. I mean, it will kill the Swords of Rivendell off just that a little bit more quickly, but will you need those Silver Thorns later on? Or is simply having the Watchers of the Golden Wood as a melee unit here in the late game enough? Yeah, that's still the Dwarven Catapult crew running away. Over here, a Legion of Armenelos making their way forwards. Catapult in a little bit of danger there of getting itself stuck on the terrain, as can happen in Med 2. I think we probably will go up to times 6 speed. We won't make a cut as such, but we'll go up to times 6 speed because there is a transitional phase now I mean, that whole part was really the transitional thing. Now it's just trying to get across the map, get into a position where you can attack the final stand. There's nowhere left for the defenders to retreat to. They've made their decision on this area. Can you take a position within this fortress? I think you can. I don't know whether this is one of those buildings, though, where you can pass through the walls wholesale rather than just through this gap. Otherwise, I would recommend, actually, this would be a pretty good place to take cover and make the battlefield as narrow as possible, and that might be your best bet. You won't be able to use your own skirmishes, but then I don't necessarily know how much ammunition they have left in their own skirmishes. Especially not when they continue to utilise it in that way. Both Mirkwood and Imladris have been very guilty of wasting several volleys worth of precious ammo in this battle. And this is ×2 speed from this point, but yeah, this is a little bit more concerning. Catapult bombardment, and there's not really a whole lot that the defenders can do about it. Very nice hits into the first line of defence, the Ironfoot Spears, and also some collateral here done to the Dragon Slayer's Verig Mithrin as well. Earlier on we did see defending catapults do a real number on Mordor, and now the favour is most assuredly being returned by the attackers. And they're hitting some important units to the defenders' cause as well. I think they can't really afford to be too picky, considering the fact they've been willing to use their ammunition on much weaker foes than this. I was going to say, now they need to start opening up and at least go down swinging, if that is indeed what their fate is to be. Final 10k frames now, so once, as is usually the custom, the final phase of the battle well and truly underway. Northern archers, only 12 of them. Elves of the Elven King being targeted, having to fire their own ammunition way up into the sky, which is unfortunate for them. Longbottom mob moving forwards. Numenorian steel bows in place. They don't have that much ammunition, but what volleys they do have saved here till the late game. Going to be very, very useful for doing some damage to individual targets. Banderbrass archers covering the advance as well. Narina Iroh guards still have a bit of ammunition. Watchers of the Golden Wood are there. Don't know why they're cowering here way at the back. The time is now. Overwhelming force needs to be applied to the situation to dislodge the defenders from their comfortable spot on the hill. But I suppose, given the amount of ammunition the attackers still have left, and given the defenders' somewhat wasteful nature so far, it makes sense to try and whittle them down. As the attackers have done, this has been a very successful showing of attackers using their skirmishes to do damage to the defenders before then bringing the hammer down on their front lines. Which is neat to see. Very often we see this done in incorrect ways, whereby one side or the other is being far, far too slow. But this is just the right balance, this, that we've seen so far. Hearing Pain continue to fire away. God Helene doing their thing. Firing into the Alvalin Vineyard back there. Still plenty of these spears over here. Proudfoot Protectors are another unit to be worried about because of course they're crossbows and pikes, exactly the sort of thing which in the late game can be a true nightmare. There goes Thranduil, lucky to perhaps survive the cavalry charge earlier on, but will not get the same fortune with a catapult shot. This is a real beating this. I mean, the defenders don't really have much else they can do. A counter-attack is going to result in them being swallowed whole by the waiting ranks of the attackers. They need the terrain. I think at this point it's a little bit too late regardless. I don't think there is a way that they can truly recover from this. Hearing Pain, I mean, it's only small amounts of damage being done by the catapult at this point, but it's all adding up. More Axguard of Erebor fall. All of these are resulting in at least some hits. So that Dorwinion catapult proving itself to be extremely effective. Very good hit there as well on the Woodland Protectors. Can only apologise for the constant hollering by the elves. They do so love to do that when they're firing their missiles. Them and the Easterlings, I've noticed, in terms of their voice files, are always the ones which shout and scream the most when they're using their archers and other such ranged units. This front line is starting to look a lot more haggard now, isn't it? There's one archer over there, one Elvelyn marksman who's continuing to do his thing. Oh, he died. He was focused down. The insult would not be brooked any longer. As the fight continues, are we going to see a melee strike at this point? Again, it does go to show how the attackers have rationed their skirmishers quite wisely, in spite of the fact they've been constantly using them. They haven't just been dumping all their ammunition in great big blobs. They've been very precise with how they've been using them, and that's been really, I think, the defining feature of this battle, as I've already said. We are now into the melee engagements. Vinegard and Steel Bows, not exactly the scariest initial push, but it doesn't need to be, given the losses already inflicted. But yes, for the defenders, there was always an element of chaos, there was always an element of waste. And these little things, in spite of the fact none of it was really all that bad, in a 5v3 there is really no room for mistakes in this kind of situation, especially not when you're facing off against a... I mean, this battle is obviously not law-friendly, but you're facing off against a variety of factions with different strengths. Plenty of opportunities for them to take advantage of them. Pharazim Swordmaster's still alive. Seafarers and Indamos moving forwards. As the battle races towards its conclusion. I think the catapult's out of ammunition at this point. Loren-armed archers continuing to do their thing, getting as many arrows downrange as they can. The Temple Guard as well, still alive in spite of the rather tricky situation they found themselves in, being focused down by the elders of the Elven King. Still able to fire some of their steel bow projectiles into the front line. Speaking of steel bows, they and the Royal Legion of Armenelos, so both of the Numenorian bodyguard units are still alive, which means any hope that the defenders had of trying to weather this storm through sheer quality is almost certainly not going to wash. This is a little bit risky, I think, from the attacking artillery. I think they hit almost entirely their own men there, and that was fairly devastating, so there is no need for such things. Gwaithir Myrdain coming off the front line again, although I don't really think there's much point in doing that. I mean, at this point you may as well just commit everything you have and kind of hope for the best, I guess. Greenwood Rangers doing their thing. A unit which we did get to see in a snapshot. We got to see how devastating Rangers can truly be against those Calden Ring Patrol, but they haven't been the decisive thing that the defenders often need them to be in this battle, unfortunately for them. Javelins being thrown, Obsidian Guard being committed forwards. They escaped death earlier on, but I don't think they're going to have any such luck now. Seafarers moving forwards, still plenty of projectiles crisscrossing back and forth. They still have ammo, the defenders. It's not as if they wasted so much that they've got nothing left to respond with here in the late game. Like I said, the mistakes the defenders have made have actually been fairly minor. But that can be enough in a situation like this. Temple Guard moving forward and being introduced once again to Silverthorn arrows, unfortunately for them. Eldenway archers out of ammunition, so they will be charging forward. Gwaithir Myrdain being sequestered at the back, but there's no real need to keep them hidden anymore. May as well throw them in and go down swinging. The quality of the defenders' units that they still have left is such that they should narrow the gap to the point where this is a reasonably close fight. Indeed, you can see here that so far the attacks are still winning by 7%. The elite units should be enough to cleave their way through some more of these units yet, but not enough to turn this fight completely on its head. I don't think there's anything left for... I mean, what's this back here? Velvel and Vinegard. They're just gonna hang out and watch. Lumberman, Proudfoot Protectors, also the sort of thing which is not really something that can be reconciled with here in the late game, given that they are pikemen. I suppose they still do have missiles, and these missiles are still doing their thing. I mean, if they did have like a full unit of rangers, and maybe some of these archers had more of their manpower left so they could do damage more quickly, maybe all hope would not be lost, but they would need a higher level of DPS than I think they're currently able to supply. Also, there's also attacking rangers, which is the sort of thing which is going to result in the ultimate demise of the Greenwoods.
Our ally lies dead, slain by the enemy. We must help his men avenge him.
Indeed. God Halim. A bit further back, Hiri Pang. Finding the Gwaithir Myrdain will be committed by the looks of things. And the Watchers of the Golden Wood, who still do have a bit of ammunition now, also returning the favour to the God Halim Einaua. Einaua? I always struggled with that one. I feel like I've been saying it wrong all this time, but I don't have any other... I don't really have the reference to say that correctly. Meanwhile, Gwaithir Myrdain do charge in, the Proudfoot Protectors have also been committed, so we're starting to see really the part of the battle where everyone's just throwing everything in. I think the overall outcome is fairly clear. 7% seems to be where we're going to stick with. Certainly a close battle, but ever since the final stand began it was very clear that the attackers were going to take home the victory on this occasion. Elsewhere, Helvellyn infantry pushing up the hill. The Temple Guard actually did make it in the end, despite the attentions they were receiving from the God Halim. They did make it, and that's another example of how tough and resilient they are, I suppose. The Helvellyn infantry also behind enemy lines with the farmers of Buckland, now able to chew away on the archers of Rivendell there. Pharazim Swordmass is still at the very centre of this front line, which I'm surprised the Elder Enway are still holding on, but there they are. Gwaithir Myrdain. Real monsters in melee combat. I wonder if and when we come to do the armour-piercing shock infantry tourney, whether they will be the ultimate victors or not. I would expect them to be honest. Given the extra elven melee defense that they come with, it should make them superior even to stuff like the Sons of Durin. But perhaps that is a question that can be answered another day. Still some Lorenaard archers back there. Everything I think at this point has actually been committed on that unit of Lorenaard archers. At 7% it remains. Oh, the crazy death animation where someone gets hit so hard they go 2D and T-pose into the floor. Classic medieval 2. And the Pharazim Swordmass is pushing up the hill into the God Halim. The God Halim actually have the terrain and numbers advantage, so this is a situation in which if it was left 1-1 they may actually win, but there's going to be reinforcements on the way. Maybe a catapult crew is not exactly the reinforcements they were hoping for, but it'll do for now. Farmers of Buckland. Anything left in here? They're fighting something. Ah, it's the Dwarven General. Fair enough. There he goes. Generals, of course, have got a little bit more resilience in the unit they're a part of, which is why it is a good idea to put your general in a strong unit, because then he himself has got better stats. Not hard to have better stats than civilians if you put him in a unit of such, but obviously it does mean that you can use your more elite units more freely. Swings and roundabouts. It looks as though the God Halim are going to be the last unit left alive for the defenders by the looks of things. Lorenaard archers are still there. Nope, the God Halim routed, so there's something else. Must be the Gwaithir Myrdain then. And I guess they are also lock morale in comparison to their Silverthorn arrow-slinging brethren. There's nothing really here which would cause them too many problems. I mean, the Proudfoots maybe, there's a lot of armour-piercing units, but they are a little bit more... well, they're weaker in terms of their survivability. We've got the Watchers of the Golden Wood, but I don't know if they'll be able to push their way in quickly enough to actually have any sort of bearing on the outcome of this fight. But there we have it. And it is going to remain... Actually, no, it's 9% in the end, so... The attackers pushing that advantage a little bit further by the end, but... Very, very good. Nice to see this map as well. It's a good map. It's a shame we've only seen it once before. It is rather large. Actually, no, we've seen it twice before. We've seen it once in more of a field battle situation. That's it. Now I remember. We've seen it in this kind of situation before, in a siege, where the last stand took place on the other hill, and the other time was when it was a free-for-all, essentially, which was quite interesting. It's the kind of map with its varying terrain which can work quite nicely for a free-for-all. But there we go. On this occasion, the attackers do win. Sword's Edge, yeah, I mean, it could have been different. I think those little mistakes the defenders made were enough to push the battle beyond them a little bit, as it was, and yeah, I think the attackers did quite well. So yeah, let's see what did the damage for the hobbits, who were the most effective in terms of kills among the attackers, but then they were also able to take advantage of a bit more of a chaotic dwarven front line, whereas the others were a little bit more well disciplined. The Ents getting a fair amount of kills, and the Bjornings obviously puncturing the dwarven front lines and going after some of the squishier offerings in behind. Going after the Blacklocks proved to be a very good thing indeed. Nothing else breaking 100 kills, but nothing else really doing too badly in the grand scheme of things. I mean, 13 is obviously not great, but it's only on a unit of hobbitry and arms. Very, very basic indeed. So a well-balanced thing with their generals units, or high-tier units, doing the business. So yeah, big thank you to Y2K for sending this battle in. Nice to see this map once again, like I said, and it was a good quality fight as well, with twists and turns, and ultimately I think that the right team ended up winning because of the overall tactics they used were pretty good and well executed. So, as for what's going to be coming up soon, I think this is going to be just after a channel update that I did. I've mentioned in that one that there will be a live stream at some point for me to talk through some of the topics that I mentioned in that video. And yeah, we'll be having a little discussion about what may be happening throughout the rest of 2022 with regards to the channel in that one. Hopefully by then I'll have a little bit more clarity by the time May rolls around about what's actually going to be happening in that regard. As for other things, other videos, got a couple of battles from Eclipse, one which is a field battle, one which is a siege, and I think there's another one that he's trying to make work because I was actually a part of it, but it ended up desyncing rather significantly. But there may be 3 upcoming battles from Eclipse in the next month or so. As for other things, there's also going to be 3 actually Silmarillion Total War battle replays, which will be showcasing the new faction that's been added to the game in the Naugrim, the dwarves. So that should be fun to see. A couple of sieges and a field battle for that as well. So that's 6 videos in and of itself, which actually, considering one of the recent things I said in the latest channel update was the fact that I was a little bit concerned about the fact that replays were starting to slow a little bit. This has been a bit of a shot in the arm, which it seems like will at the very least see us through till June, which is good to see. But other than that, like I said, it's really just a case of waiting and seeing what's going to happen with the channel as the year goes along. But yeah, big thank you to Y2K once again. Big thank you to all the players for being a part of this battle replay. I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you'll join me for whatever is next.